Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking a look at the Asus RTX 4090 TUF Gaming OC, and this is one of the best looking models that I've seen yet, at least in my opinion. And I don't just mean, well, visually how it looks, but I'm probably more impressed with the build quality and design of this particular model. The Gigabyte Gaming OC that I looked at recently, it was very plasticky, gave it a bit of a cheap look and feel in my opinion, whereas the TUF Gaming, well, it does away with plastic almost entirely, with the only real exceptions being the fans. So that huge gunmetal fan shroud is actually made of aluminium and not plastic, and boy does it feel sturdy. And of course it looks great as well. Doing away with plastic fan shrouds on graphics cards that will sell for over $1,000 US is a must in my opinion, and Asus has just cemented this for me with the TUF Gaming. Now Asus claims that the die-cast metal exoskeleton, gotta love the marketing speak there, adds structural rigidity and further increases heat dissipation, both of which are probably true, more so the structural rigidity, but a metal fan shroud will help suck some heat away from the PCB. Now in terms of dimensions, the TUF Gaming is a big unit, as you'd expect from an RTX 4090 graphics card. It measures 348mm long, 150mm tall, and 73mm wide, so slightly longer than the Gigabyte Gaming OC that I just looked at. It's also quite a bit heavier than the Gigabyte model at 2,313 grams. That's a 16% increase in weight there. And the length could be an issue for some cases, so make sure you check that before buying. Most cases do provide the maximum supported graphics card length in the specifications. It's also worth noting that this is yet another 4-slot graphics card that's going to place a lot of load on your PCIe slot. So helping with that, Asus has included a pillar of support, which they say banishes sag, while also including a neat little Phillips head screwdriver. Yep, you can't make this stuff up. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. It does work, but it is a bit jerry-rigged, I reckon. Basically, it's an aluminium leg, like a miniature adjustable desk leg that magnetically attaches to your case, assuming of course that you don't have a plastic basement divider, and then it extends to support the graphics card. Personally, I think a more permanent solution that's less visible would be far better here, but assuming that you have a metal surface, it is a very quick and easy install. Getting back to the fan shroud, embedded within are 3 105mm fans, and as was the case with Gigabyte's Gaming OC, the outer fan spins counterclockwise while the centrally located fan spins clockwise, as this helps to reduce turbulence, maximizing airflow. There's also a start-stop feature which sees the fans inactive when the GPU dips below 50 degrees. Now, side on, the TUF Gaming also looks great, and this was another issue I had with the Gigabyte Gaming OC, which looked pretty awful side on with awkward GeForce RTX branding. But here, the branding actually looks great, and you get a nice TUF Gaming logo. It's an aggressive but tasteful looking product in my opinion. The TUF logo is RGB backlit, and under it we have a small light bar. Both are ARGB Aura compatible, and can be controlled via the Armoury Crate software. Also, as you'd expect, there is a 16-pin PCIe 5.0 power connector, and Asus is offering dual BIOS support with a performance and quiet BIOS mode. Both BIOS versions though are loaded with a 450 watt profile, so the only difference here is the fan speed, and as usual, I'll be doing all my testing using the performance mode, but if you want to reduce the operating volume at the expense of thermals, you can. Around at the rear side of the card is a full-size aluminium backplate which features more GeForce RTX branding, which is no doubt a requirement from Nvidia, but again, it looks fine. There are a few other details and designs here which look nice, and then towards the end of the card we have a large cutout which allows air to pass through. In my opinion, even the rear of the TUF Gaming looks great, and Asus has included some mounting points here for, I suppose, an anti-sag type bracket like what we saw from Gigabyte, but sadly no such bracket was included. We just got the pillar of support. Then at the opposite end, so the I/O end, the TUF Gaming still looks very sleek, and here we have a stainless steel I/O bracket which includes 3 DisplayPort 1.4A ports and 2 HDMI 2.1A ports, and you can use a maximum of 4 simultaneously. Now, time to take the cooler off, and this is a pretty straightforward job. The removal of just a dozen screws is required. With the screws removed, you then need to disconnect the fan and LED cables, and this allows the aluminium fan shroud to lift off. Then you need to carefully apply some lifting pressure to the heatsink and wait for the seal created by the thermal pads to break. Doing so reveals a 14-layer PCB which measures just 220mm long and 145mm tall, so quite compact given the overall dimensions of the graphics card. Mounted on the PCB is a Monolithic Power Systems 10-phase MP288A PWM controller, along with a UPI Semi 4-phase UP9512Q controller. The UPI Semi controller is used to power the GDDR6X memory, driving 4 Vishay SiC 638 50A power stages, and Gigabyte did use these power stages exclusively on their gaming OC. Asus, on the other hand, though, has upgraded the GPU power delivery with 18 Infineon TDA 21570 70A power stages, providing an 18+4 MOSFET design. Now, moving over to the cooling side of things, Asus has gone with a different approach to that of Gigabyte's gaming OC. Firstly, there's half as many thermal pads here, and they are much thicker. Whereas Gigabyte attempted to suck heat away from basically any heat-generating component, Asus has focused exclusively on the critical stuff such as the GPU, memory, and power stages. So that means there's no thermal extraction for the inductors, capacitors, or controllers. Another potential drawback to this design is the fact that Asus hasn't included a separate heat spreader for the memory. This can be an issue because the memory ICs don't stand nearly as tall as the GPU die, so to address this, Asus has opted to use very thick thermal pads. Thick thermal pads are far less conductive than metal, so I expect this design to negatively impact memory temperatures, and of course that is something I will investigate shortly. Asus has included separate heat spreaders for the power stages, but they aren't height adjusted, as in they've just gone with the same thick thermal pads that they use for their memory, so I'm expecting them not to work as well if they had have used thinner thermal pads. And then moving around to the heatsink, which weighs 1080 grams, that is slightly less than that of the gaming OC heatsink, and we find 8 heat pipes connected to a nickel-plated vapor chamber. There's 5 8mm and 3 6mm thick heat pipes, all of which are nickel-plated, so that is a nice touch. Finally, the backplate is very thin, especially given how large the surface area is, but in an effort to improve the structural integrity, Asus has folded the edges. Additionally, the backplate's also been used as a heat spreader by connecting it to the backside of the PCB using thermal pads, which help to extract built-up heat behind the GDDR6X memory. It's an impressive cooler that appears well built, and therefore I expect it will cool the TUF gaming graphics card very well, so to find out, let's go over some stress test results. Here's a look at how the TUF gaming operates after an hour of Hitman 3 at the 4K resolution using the maximum in-game quality settings. These temperatures were recorded in a 21-degree room installed inside an ATX case with the doors closed. Here we see that the GPU hotspot hit 77 degrees, though the fan speed was reasonably low at 1800 RPM, and this generated 41 decibels of noise. The average GPU temperature peaked at 67 degrees and the memory at 76 degrees. Now, time for some overclocking. By default, the TUF gaming has a 480 watt power limit, with a maximum adjustable power limit of 108%, and this means the BIOS will allow you to go as high as 520 watts, which is 80 watts lower than that of the gaming OC. So, with the power target maxed out, I got overclocking. This allowed my TUF gaming to reach a stable core frequency of 2985 MHz, which resulted in an average power draw of 495 watts, while the memory peaked at 23.4 gigabits per second. This increased the GPU hotspot temperature to 84 degrees and the memory temperature to 80 degrees. That said, the fan speed had now ramped up to 2000 RPM, and now you could quite easily hear the graphics card over the case fans, but it wasn't alarmingly loud. So even overclocked to the max, the TUF gaming was very manageable. Now, for a comparison with the 4090s I've looked at thus far, so the Founders Edition and Gigabyte Gaming OC. Starting with the average GPU temperature, we see that the TUF gaming ran at 67 degrees, which is the same result received when testing the gaming OC, and a 5-degree reduction from the FE model, though the fan speed was 250 RPM higher. Not a massive difference, but that will typically account for a degree or two. Then when overclocked to the maximum stable frequency that I could achieve, the TUF gaming ran at 72 degrees, so again the same temperature recorded on the gaming OC, though the fan speed was quite a bit lower on the Asus model. Next we have the hotspot temperature comparison, and again we find the TUF gaming is very similar to the gaming OC, running just a degree hotter stock and overclocked, but the fan speed was also 200 to 300 RPM lower, so overall GPU cooling performance is much the same for both models. Now this is where things get a bit interesting when it comes to thermals. Remember those thick thermal pads that we saw on the TUF gaming? As expected, they're not super efficient at removing heat, and as a result, the GDDR6X memory on the Asus card does run much hotter than the gaming OC. We're looking at a 12-degree increase in memory temperature, both stock and overclocked. Now, although this is a significant increase, it's still less than that of Nvidia's Founders Edition model and well within safe limits. So while Asus certainly could have done better here, the result is acceptable. As always, the overclocking results are pretty boring as Nvidia heavily limits what their partners can do when it comes to operating parameters. So, as will be the case with basically all RTX 4090s, there's only around 5 to 6% more performance that can be extracted. That's it. It's basically not worth the effort in my opinion, but if you want those few extra frames while risking stability, then go for it. It's a real shame that stuff like voltages can't be increased, even just a little bit, as that would help unlock additional performance. Instead, Nvidia has limited their partners to the point where high-end exciting graphics cards are very pointless, and AMD's really no better in that regard. So you might as well just buy a base model, provided the thermal performance is acceptable, and that's certainly been the case with models that I've looked at so far. So the Asus RTX 4090 TUF Gaming OC, it isn't anything special in terms of frame rate performance. I mean, despite being just another brutally fast RTX 4090, it can't unlock a level of performance that's not attainable with any other 4090. But as I've said, that's typical of modern graphics cards. They're all pretty much the same when it comes to gaming performance. That leaves looks, build quality, operating volume, and thermals. Now, in terms of aesthetic design, the TUF Gaming is hands down the best RTX 4090 that I've seen so far. And while subjective, the build quality isn't. It's a very high quality graphics card that certainly rivals the quality of Nvidia's Founders Edition. The only potential weakness include memory cooling performance and the physical card length. For the memory cooling, the results were acceptable, and the strong GPU thermal performance coupled with the low operating volume is the real win here. The length of the card is extreme, but basically all cases these days clearly state the maximum supported graphics card length, so make sure you check that out before buying to make sure the TUF Gaming will actually fit your case. Also, as a side note, I was a little bit disappointed with the desk leg solution for tackling GPU sag. Asus needs to scrap that one in my opinion. I'm confident the bracket Gigabyte provides with the gaming OC doesn't really cost that much more, and it is a significantly better solution. Overall though, I do think the TUF Gaming is a very high quality product, and I certainly believe it to be of higher quality than the Gigabyte Gaming OC. Having said that though, if you like flashy lights and all that RGB goodness, then the Gaming OC will probably be a bit more appealing to you, but of course I will leave that one for you to decide on. At the end of the day, both worked well and did a good job of representing the RTX 4090. And there's not much more to say here. The TUF Gaming is an excellent RTX 4090, and so far it looks like the model that I would buy if I were to buy an RTX 4090. And I think, well, RTX 4090s aside, I've looked at many graphics cards over the years, and I'd say this is probably, well, it's certainly one of the absolute best examples I've seen over all the years of reviewing graphics cards. It's very high quality, very impressed with what Asus has done here. But anyway, that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, well, give it a like, please. Also subscribe because we will have many more 4090 reviews. 4080s, they're only 16 gigabyte 4080s now. And then, of course, we'll probably do multiple roundups of the various RDNA 3 GPUs. So there'll be a lot of GeForce and Radeon graphics card coverage, probably before year's end and into next year. So yeah, subscribe for that. Also, if you'd like to become a Hardware Unboxed community member, we have Floatplane, Patreon. Either of those are good. Get you access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&As, behind the scenes content, a lot of cool stuff there. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. But if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.